joining us this evening. Whether you are here in person or watching remotely, thank you for joining us for this event with Brookline author Mai Kim Le. Mai will be discussing her memoir, Worlds Apart, My Personal Life Journey Through Transcultural Poverty, Privilege, and Passion, in conversation with library trustee Chris China Sulkin. It's always such a delight to host local authors and celebrate our local community here at the library, and I'm so glad to have Mai and Chris here this evening. I just have a few announcements and then we'll begin our program. So while the town of Brookline no longer requires masks for those here in person, we do have extras available and we would like them right over there on the table. You will also find information about upcoming library programs, including a flash fiction writing workshop 2 weeks from today, as well as a feedback forum for the library. I would like to thank Brookline Booksmith, whose booksellers are here this evening selling copies of Worlds Apart. After our talk and Q&A, Mai will be signing copies, so please stick around to get your books signed. I would also like to thank the Brookline Interactive Group, who are broadcasting and recording this evening's program. Those of you here in the audience, please note that the camera is focused on the stage, but any questions or comments made during the Q&A will be recorded. If you do not wish to be recorded but do have a question, you are welcome to write it and hand it to me over there and we can ask it for you. And now, let me introduce our speakers. Mai Kim Le is a Vietnamese American who plunged into a new culture at the age of 3 after starting her journey traveling by boat from war-torn Vietnam to the U.S. She grew up in Seattle, Washington in the 80s at the height of the grunge culture and moved to sunny Anaheim, California before Lac Ta was erected in Westminster. Apologies for Vietnamese pronunciation. Mai's family finally settled in Lawrence, Massachusetts, which became her beloved childhood hometown, where she graduated from Lawrence High School. Mai's career path has zigzagged since she graduated from Bowdoin College and Princeton University. She spent most of her 20s saving the world in Africa, Asia, and the Middle East, but she then gave all of that up for love to be with her college best friends and moved back to Boston to raise her 3 beautiful kids and 2 furry friends. The rest of Mai's trajectory has been mapped out by stumbling onto new passions and interests that she never knew she had. Mai hopes that her story will allow others to open up, navigate their own struggles, and find fulfillment from their own path as they discover their future. Chris China Sulkin is grounded in a strong belief in eliminating structural barriers to equity for marginalized populations. Chris holds leadership positions with state, local, regional, and national governance and civic engagement organizations, working to promote racial, gender, and health equity. She served as a gubernatorial appointee to the Massachusetts Asian American Commission and the Commission on the Status of Women, where she advocated for the needs of Asian Americans and women throughout the Commonwealth. And of course, here at the library, we know Chris as one of our library trustees. So now I am so pleased to introduce Mai Kim Le and Chris China Sulkin. Welcome both.
Hi everyone. Can you all hear us? Okay, good. So my name is Chris, and I'm very excited to introduce Mai to everyone. And I'm excited to have this opportunity for many reasons. So what is May? Go Shay! May is Asian American Pacific Heritage Islander Month. So say that a few times. So we're excited because we get to hear my story and celebrate together, and this is the beginning of many celebrations that we'll have throughout the town. I'm excited to start off. I just have to say that I'm learning so much. She's a friend from many years ago, but until I read her book, literally did not know any of this. And I was like, really? And I was like, oh, this is so long. So if you haven't read it, please read it. And I will try not to give away all the juicy parts. Wanted to start off because we're here in the library and it's all about reading and creativity and writing. And I had no idea that you wrote. She wrote this book in a pandemic. which in this pandemic that we're in, I was also blown away by that because I was barely staying alive here in this pandemic, and we're in sweatpants and things like that. But she writes books. I want to hear about it, but I also want you all to participate too. So we'll take questions. But first, I just wanted to start off with, okay, take me back so that we can set the stage because I feel like this book is a movie in the making. Um, so I know of you as Mai who lives in Brookline, who likes good coffee and runs. But really, um, your story started way back with boats, and I mean, literally, it's like a movie. So if you can just sort of take me back to how you could write about that, because obviously you started off talking about escaping from Vietnam and you're a baby, so you didn't know that. So how did you sit down and decide to write this, but then get all of this information together to share? Because it started when you were one.
Yes. Oh, thank you so much, Chris. Thank you everyone for being here. First of all, for a long time, for 40 years, over 40 years, I was told I could not write.
Can y'all hear her?
Can you all hear me? I need to scream.
She needs to be louder, right?
Yes, okay.
Okay.
I got it. Now that I have a voice, I know to use it, right? So for a long time, I had all of this experience, all this trauma, my journey from Vietnam to the U.S. and everything was kind of internalized, and I just didn't know what to do with it. And at some point, this one exploded on pages. And what other things, I was told that I wasn't a good writer, I wasn't a good speaker, that this was, and I internalized that, and that manifested itself into that. And so I just avoided writing, and I was just too afraid to do it. But during the pandemic, I really wanted a way to speak to my family, speak to myself, and reflect. And I started in February of last year. And one night, my first night writing from 12 a.m. to 4 a.m., I had close to 100 pages. And I just continued on, and I was done. I had 600 pages by April, and I didn't know what to do with all that. But it was a self-reflection for me, and I wanted to have a story for my family, my nieces and nephews, and I wanted a way to also kind of just share that story at some point, but I was really afraid because I'm pretty much naked out there. I'm very vulnerable. There are things that people don't know about me that when I'm ready to kind of open up. So that's how it just came out because I had all of it in me already, and it just kind of flew out on pages basically.
So yeah. Yeah, you wish you could be louder. Okay. No, so it just came out and you had to do this. You had 600 pages. And there's so much in this book. So I was like, well, what are we going to talk about? Because I felt like we could talk about being a refugee and escaping Vietnam, finding a new place, literally living in poverty and going to school, then, making your way in school, not speaking English as a first language, having, bicultural children. And like, I won't even get into the whole like romance part with Arcady because we got to go on a double date. Arcady, wherever you are. Wow. We have a lot to talk about. And mental health. And you are, when you said naked, you are bearing it all in here. When you talk about your struggles with mental health, I loved every bit of it because this is something that I don't think we talk about ever in our Asian American communities. And there's a huge stigma. So please, yeah. So tell me about how you decided, you know what, I'm going to be naked, I'm going to write about this, and I'm going to share this. Why and how? How could you just do this?
Oh, it's really hard. I mean, to kind of divulge all my inner workings, my demons, my fears, my challenges to the world, that's insane. I mean, that's usually kept inside, especially for an Asian American. For Asian Americans, we just don't share these things. This is not meant for the world. This is meant for us to bury it and sweep under the rug. And it was really challenging. But what I shared my story and it impacted one person, even if that negatively impacts me, but it positively impacts someone else, I think I've done something good. And that's what I wanted. I wanted to release it so that I can kind of break that barrier to voicing what we struggle with, because honestly, we all struggle with it. Whether, this pretty dresses hides everything else that's underneath it for,
My specs.
But I just think that we honestly have this facade, and whether you're white, black, Asian, rich, poor, refugee, non-refugee, we're all struggling with something. And I think if we can have compassion for someone else to really understand that it doesn't matter who's a victim and who's the victimizer, that maybe we can actually kind of don't swing in society from one polarized end to the next. Maybe we can come to the middle and start listening to each other. That's the whole point of the book. And if I can do that, I think I achieved what I wanted to do.
Okay, well, we're going to ask you to be louder.
Sorry, everyone.
Can you hear me?
Can you hear me now? Is that better? Okay. Okay.
So I do this.
Are we good? Okay.
So I wanted to have you to read a little bit from your book on page 72, 73 or so, where you don't have to read the whole thing, basically about your struggles with writing. Because there's a couple things that when I read this, I just was like, oh, because, and you say it clearly, like, we're Asian, we're supposed to be good at math and science.
Yeah, we're not supposed to have a voice, right?
Right? And that really hits home, right? Because we're missing on all these amazing stories and sharing. So if you could just take a moment to loudly read.
Okay, I will try that. But also, I want to say, what if that's the model minority thing, right? What if you aren't good at math, but you're good at writing? So we need to break that stereotype. Okay, so on 72, I'll start. This is way at the beginning when I couldn't read. So basically, I learned how to read when I first moved to Massachusetts in Worcester, and I was in 4th, 5th grade, and I realized I could not even say a sentence. I couldn't read a word. So they put me into an intensive, reading program, whatever that was. I don't know what they call it now. But I started to string words together, and I didn't know what those words meant at that time, but I was able to say them, and I think that was the beginning of my journey into reading. So on 72, so I just couldn't understand how someone could write 10 pages in the same time it took me to write only 1 page. This was in college, so I entered college barely knowing how to write. So I wrote instead of an essay for college admissions, I actually wrote a poem because it was easier to write in verses, a couple of words, and then write an entire essay and put that together. So I can write disjunctly, and it'll tell you something, and I can rhyme easily. So I wrote a poem on how very thin, but I had a struggle in college because it's a liberal arts college. So I'll start from the beginning. So I did struggle a bit academically at Fulton. To put it mildly, I was not well prepared for the academic rigor at Fulton, especially when it came to writing course papers and such. I did quite well in science and math, but I also had to take liberal arts requirements that forced me to express myself in writing. I was so scared of writing an essay or report I went several nights without sleeping hardly at all. I just couldn't understand how someone could write 10 pages in the same time it took me to write only 1 page. And their 10 pages often sounded like a work of art torn from the pages of novel. Mine, on the other hand, felt constricted and forced in the same tight tone that I spoke, carefully thought through, reviewed, Even a hint of personality and flow were missing, not to mention any adherence to the rules of grammar. As expected, during my freshman year, I did well in science and math, getting high grades, but my courses that required writing lowered my grade point average. Then, in an English seminar on black and white cinema, I gave up trying to write correctly, and instead literally wrote whatever was on my mind about the sexual innuendos of Marilyn Monroe. I always give the fuzzy end of the lollipop to like Jello on springs in some like it hot. I didn't hold back at all with my foul language and blunt sexual analysis. I took the risk of letting my true thoughts flow onto written pages without inhibition, feeling I didn't have anything to lose, that I'll get a bad grade anyway. So that's what I did with this book too. I just let it all out. I didn't hold back. I didn't think about the grammar. I didn't think about the structure. I had a story. I had words. You know what? I just wanted to get it out, and that's what I did.
And there was some sexual and bad words in there.
Tons.
Just full disclosure, it is not PG. But it was, I guess for me in reading it, I have to say, and maybe it's the same with all of you, that this is something that many Asian American children struggle with, right? I mean, I don't think it's changed too much, right? We still struggle with the model minority myth.
We do, and I think even as parents, even though we know that we should embrace writing, we should embrace our voice, allow them to kind of dive into the creative part of life, we kind of hold back because we think, how do you survive? But I've learned in writing this book that survival is more than having a roof over our head, feeding our stomach. When we need our soul, we need to kind of relate to others, and we want to break down barriers. Those words, that artwork, photography, all that creative aspect of letting everything that's inside of us loose into something that tells a story is what we can help. And as Asian Americans, that's what we need to help our next generation.
And I think something that people don't realize is that we're losing so much as we continue to perpetuate this by hiding your own creativity if you're Asian American, for example, right? Like, there are so many untold stories out there, works of art, drama.
Well, let me ask you a question. If everything is lost, what else is there after the
She's so profound. Am I the moderator?
our stories.
Right.
Our stories.
And then we also saw in this pandemic that we were in, at one point, it was really movies, TV, books, puzzles, and all those aspects that gave us meaning, right?
Yes, and that's when, like for example, songwriters. Taylor Swift, for example. She writes about her breakup. It makes her feel good. People relate to it. People dance to it. It gives us a way to kind of express ourselves. And that's what I hope I can really instill my kids to express themselves in whatever ways they can.
So when I read the beginning of your book, it says it's dedicated to Leia, your daughter, and then it's dedicated to your family and your children and to your husband. But it says that you wrote this for your children, essentially. Now, I think it's hard because we live in the United States where we have a model minority myth and imposter syndrome, and that many people, but also Asians, suffer from, and then also that we have systemic racism and discrimination. Like, what have you? Because you talk about worlds apart, and you talk about like she has been to like everywhere, all across Africa and Europe and just so many places. But I guess, what would you say to your children now? Some of them are out here in the audience. What would you say to them, knowing that you had overcome all of this? Like, and then what do we as a society need to do in our schools, in our towns, we're here in a library.
Well, there's a lot there to break down.
I've got some time.
Okay.
15 minutes.
The first is, look, we all have struggles, right? I thought that being a refugee, I've learned to persevere, have tenacity because of my experience. And I felt that having children in a privileged world that they're going to lose all that, and that they're just going to, they need to struggle in order to, I thought they need to struggle in order to understand that. But I realized one thing, which I talk about in the book, that at some point, it doesn't matter where you are, who you are, you will struggle with life, whether you're internally, externally, however, whether it's financially, whether even white men struggle now. It's no, hear me out.
I'm hearing you.
Okay. It's like this whole intersectionality that, this whole discourse on their identity gives them privileges, gives them advantages, but they also experience disadvantages. And they also need to, like, my husband, for example, he just feels like he's not needed in society anymore. I'm invited to all these talks or being on panels, and he's like, oh, I'm just another white man, right? But the white men throughout life have helped me. If we can understand that they also have struggle, it might not be at the same as many others, and we're trying to equalize this playing field. If we can understand that they also have some problems, that maybe we can come together in some ways in the middle, that there are gray areas, that we don't have to be right or left, that this pendulum needs to stop and needs to kind of swing right in the middle. And we can really break those barriers and then have compassion for each other.
And then I guess you talk a lot about different barriers that you've encountered. And I think it was important because you talk about some pretty heavy topics and your struggles with mental health. And I guess I would just say, like, how did you decide to not make those critical decisions that you could have a number of times and get the help? Or, was it Arcady, your husband? It seems like there were different aspects of it that, as an Asian American, and in general, with mental health still being a terrible stigma, we don't speak about. People don't know. You look all, everyone looks all great on the outside, but we don't share. I mean, when you're on Facebook and Twitter, you don't share all of the trials that you're dealing with. When you only post those really nice pictures of the beautiful cake that you made, right? And all these other things, but you don't share all the struggles. So what would you say, like, how did you decide to essentially come clean on that? But really, what would you do now? Like, what would you recommend to our communities out there?
That's a really hard and really good question. Mental health is real, and I think we all, mental health is really real, and I think we all deal with it in some aspects along the spectrum. It could be one extreme, or it could be the other, or just kind of mild. But we all have these struggles from imposter syndrome to depression to anxiety. I've had it all. What you were talking about, suicide, I've encountered that. It was you just needed one person to help you, whether it was my husband, my co-founder in one of my previous business. He came over at 10 p.m. one day and said, "You gotta stop." His name is Dougie. He pulled my husband down and said, "We need to help Mai." And from that point onward, I just got back. You just need someone to help you get through the next day, because despite how bad it is, that moment in time, how cloudy it is, how dark it is, and the next day the sun will come out. And you just need to help that person get out. And the reason why I wanted to kind of make this more aware, and I think what we all can do, is remove that taboo and kind of normalize it, because I think it's so important. And especially during COVID, we all are struggling in our own ways, and I think it's so easy for us to kind of bury it and not let it out. And I think the only way for us as a society to be better is to really appreciate it and embrace that this is a problem. And that's the start of it. But we're moving in the right direction. We're not there. We don't have enough services for people struggling with mental health. It's not even covered by insurance. Most psychiatrists or therapists don't even take insurance. And there aren't even enough of them, especially for our teens and tweens. So I'm hoping that I can be loud enough to really help kind of, especially in our community, to say it's okay to talk about it.
I really appreciated it. And every time I read about it throughout the book, I was like, oh my gosh, like I wanted to call you up, but this is you over time. But you don't see it externally. Like when I see her, she's, doing all these amazing things. She's starting businesses. She's connecting with the local community. She's putting out calls and helping us help Afghan refugees or Ukrainian refugees, right? But you don't see that she's struggling. And it was really powerful to read that you went through this. But it also kind of breaks my heart because, like you said, you don't have enough mental health services. They're rarely covered. I mean, it takes a job to find a therapist. And that's even if you do speak English, as and can navigate the internet and all that. And we know there's data showing that in this pandemic, people are struggling with their mental health issues, not having care, and in particular, it's our adolescents and children. And I think that kind of gives me pause as you're writing this in the pandemic, we're able to get that help. What do we do going forward, right?
And I think we can only just continue to talk about it. We just need to continue talking about it. The worst thing is to place judgment on people and to call them names because they are going through something or to abandon them. And that happens regularly even to this day. People shy away from that. And one of the biggest things, the biggest fear in actually releasing this was that because I run a startup and I raised money and I was like, oh, I won't be able to raise the Series A the next round if investors know I'm weak. And then I called up one of my mentors and he said, you know what you need to do with your heart. You don't need me. But he said, sometimes you have to take risk in life to make change. And so I said, forget it. I'll just do it. If I can't raise a Series A, that's okay. But if I can make a difference in someone else's life, that's more important.
So how did that work out with Series A? I'm curious. It's not in the book.
I'm raising right now, and it is really hard. It is really hard.
But it's going okay, though, right?
No.
Okay. But you have a therapist we can talk to.
Yes, I have all of you to talk to about it.
Okay. Just want to make sure we're getting our help. So I wanted to turn it over to other folks as well because if you've read the book, you probably have questions. I did. If you haven't read the book, you probably have questions. And I would love to give folks an opportunity, or if there are any questions online as well, we're happy to take them. And what's interesting is May is not only Asian American Pacific Islander Heritage Month, but it's also Mental Health Awareness Month too.
Yay.
And so I just felt like when I was reading this, there was just so much, right? Like I couldn't. I was like, do I want to just spend all our time talking about mental health issues, being a refugee, raising bicultural children? Like I couldn't. Or just like, what's going on with your boyfriend/husband? Like, why are we not married yet? Which happens in the book. Our Katie, looking at you. So any questions online, Lily? Okay. Yeah. Any questions in here? Yes.
Hi, thank you so much. I read your book. I think it's fantastic. You talk a little bit about the concept of helping the helpers, people that you think have it all together, people that we go to. What would be your suggestion or advice for people to identify who the helpers are and to reach out to them to ask them if they're okay?
So, great question. He read the book and he studied it seriously and he loved it. And he said, Mai talks about helping the helpers. How do you reach out and what does she recommend doing to help those who seem to kind of don't need help? Have it all. What would you suggest?
First, let's demystify that. People, we all need help. And we might have this facade that everything's perfect. We might dismiss a lot of things, like if they are struggling or they have problems, like, oh, you're fine, you get over it, you're good, you figure out a way. But if we just pause for a moment and listen to them, even if they're quiet and silent, there's something, just be there for them. knowing that if they're having problems, they're different, and if they're, they may not be as jolly as they usually are. That, they can use a friend. So just be there. They may not reach out and ask because they're so proud that they're always solving problems. But they may not solve their own problems. And so as friends, just be there for them, even in silence, as long as you lend them your ear or your heart.
Thank you. Lily, anything? Okay. So I guess something I find interesting in when you said that was that a lot of times I think it's also hard for people to accept the help. Like I think that's just something else because then you have to like share that you need help, that things aren't okay, and that can be really hard for people. And I think that can be honestly really hard for Asian Americans because you have this like I don't know about you, I'm Thai Chinese, and my family has this whole saving face, and everyone's going to be a doctor / lawyer and Olympian. In my family, we're not. And it's really hard. You want to like keep up with appearances. So it is. I think it is doubly hard.
So for me, I don't know. Everyone has their different ways of kind of navigating that. For me, it's not that I can solve it myself. I just don't want to inconvenience someone. And then sometimes when I do kind of broach the conversation, I just want to talk, and they're like, "Oh, you're fine." They kind of dismiss it and walk, and I just kind of drop the subject. It's okay. No one really wants to listen. I also don't want to bombard people with my problems. As you can read, there are a lot of problems in this book, and so I internalize it. I think if you're willing to even just be there for that person and just let them, I don't know, have a cup of coffee, have a glass of wine, whatever it is, just to help them kind of soothe their soul in a way that it's just so meaningful. I think that's all we can do.
Really?
From the chat. So from the chat, we have, thank you so much for being here. Could you talk about any language barriers to mental health, like what if you don't know or have the words to maybe experience?
So talk about language barriers to mental health that you might have encountered, especially if you don't have the language to describe what you're going through and or your provider doesn't have the language to understand.
That's really fun. So there's a couple of things. First is the language in our culture. We don't really have words for mental health. And if you bring up stuff that you're like, oh, you're probably just crazy. There's that word crazy.
Insane, tiny.
Yeah. And so everyone's like, oh, you just need to kind of get back to reality. And so it's really hard to articulate that in our own culture, in our own language. And second, like when you're going through it, I didn't know I was going through all these problems until I reflected or it just manifested itself into different issues that I was trying to kind of solve myself. But we often, in that moment, don't know what we're going through. And I think it just takes someone or takes some time for you to kind of, just reflect and figure it out. But if you're in that moment, if you're just kind of having anxiety or you're down or low, just go out and reach out to someone or maybe talk to someone or do something just different to help you get through it. That's what you need to do.
And something I guess I will say, so in Brookline, because we're in Brookline at the Brookline Library, we have an advocacy group called the Brookline Asian American Family Network, BAFN. And the steering committee members are here, Shuan, Chang, and Louie, and so many others. But one thing that we noticed is part of the issue is there are not enough mental health providers of color who speak other languages of different cultures. And that is a systemic issue that I think starts off because Asian Americans in general, I don't know about you, but I know my family aren't, my parents weren't like, grow up and become a therapist, become a mental health worker, become a social worker, right? Like, I never heard that. It was like, become a surgeon and an engineer and then maybe an attorney in your spare time, right? So part of it is, right, like, I think we need to change. We need to shift our priorities and, introduce folks to this mental health world that they could have an amazing living in, especially now with the job opportunities.
Well, part of the reason is we kind of diminish it, right? We don't think of it as a And I think even our own parents are struggling with it until they actually accept it.
And so, okay, so, oh, you had a question. Yes, there's so much about her parents accepting it. I find it sweet. Your question.
So, when we talk about circle, starting the word flow out of your heart, and you talk about how you feel that you weren't a good writer. I feel that's very interesting because you're both working for really great reasons, and you talk about imposter syndrome. So my question is, what can you say to someone who, especially young girls, or it doesn't have to be Asian Americans, or just anyone who feels they are not good enough, but actually outsiders think they're actually awesome? Like, what can you say to them to help them be more confident in what they actually are capable of?
So her question is, you write about imposter syndrome, you're working through this, but it's not just Asian American women, but people, and it's often people of color who suffer from imposter syndrome. In case you don't know what that is, that's sort of this notion that, as good and accomplished as you are, you're really, someone's going to figure it out that, no, you're not. The jig is going to be up soon, and you're really not as good as all the awards you might have won, for example. So a lot of people, and in particular research has shown that it's often people of color and women of color that suffer from imposter syndrome. So Mike talks about that really honestly. But what would you say now? Like if you encountered, other women or other folks who suffer from that, like what would you say aside from like shaking up and talking about myself?
It's so hard. I think for a large part, I spoke at school.
Where?
At Windsor? Yeah, Windsor. So for the first part, for a large part of our life, we are shaped by other people. They tell us what our parents tell us, what our environment, and we internalize that and we become that. And so if you do something outside of that, you start to believe that you can't do it, or you don't, you might not have the confidence. And it doesn't matter how I shape that person and what I tell them, and that, oh, you are so great, you can do this. I think the first and most important thing is that they need to start believing in themselves. And it's going to take a long time. It's not going to be an overnight thing. It's going to take years. But they just need to kind of find themselves. And once they make each step and they accomplish something, then they'll start realizing it. But they need to accomplish more to start. But at least that's for me. But for others, I still have imposter syndrome. And my husband will tell me, this quote. It's not your. I can't remember the quote, even though he recites it to me all the time.
Katie, what is it? Speak up.
Zig Ziglar quote.
It's your attitude, not your aptitude, that will determine your altitude, says Arcady. Who quoted someone else?
So when we start believing that, when we have a positive attitude, then but it takes time. And I think we just need as a society to kind of don't stereotype people like you're a model minority, you're only good in science and math, you're not good in writing, and so we all avoid writing because we're told we're not good in writing. And in school, that's the same thing too. In college as well for me. And over time, you just need to break that and we need to start somewhere, for the next generation.
Are you still writing now?
Yes, I am. Yeah.
Okay, so are you still writing, like journaling, like today I went to the library and what are you doing?
Oh my God.
Like, is there more? Like, I don't know.
Okay, so there's something funny that Arcady always does. So when I have a thought,
Arcady is her husband, very much eager to Sometimes I didn't really like his character. But you're okay now.
So sometimes I have all these thoughts, and I'm like, oh my God, I need to capture that, record it or write it immediately. Those thoughts might just disappear, and I don't remember what I just, that's what happened. Well, so I'm driving. I'm like, I can't type, so I'm like, Arcady.
Yeah, because you're driving.
Yeah, I'm driving, so I'll call Arcady. I'm like, Siri, call Arc. And Arc's like, what's up? Hey, can you record this? I'm thinking of this phrase, and so I'll just start rambling on and catches it for me. In my notes, I go back and I write something with it.
That's love.
Yes, that's love. So what am I writing now? So when I spoke at Windsor, right before preparing for Windsor, I'm like, I don't know what to talk about. I don't know what I'm going to say. And then all of a sudden one morning, I had 48 lines of poem. It just came out. And that's what I recited to them. So whatever comes to my mind, I write now. The other thing I'm writing is a limited series script, which I'm done with the first episode, and the second episode is being written.
So I'm sorry, I don't think it was loud enough what she just said, so I wanted to just like pull her back 5 seconds, make her speak it louder for the people in there. Can you say again what you're writing?
I guess I'm still finding my voice. Okay.
I'm gonna help her find it.
I just completed a treatment for a 6-part limited series. So if anyone wants to act in the future, I finished the first episode and we're writing the second episode and we're hoping to pitch to Hollywood.
So what she's saying is she's writing a TV show. That's incredible.
Okay, now the question. So I have a character that's modeled after Katie. I can't figure out who would act him.
So read the book, think about who you think should star in the different roles. Maybe, hang out with her a lot and show her your acting chops, and maybe you'll get on the show. But if this becomes a TV show, the screening's going to be here, right in Hudman Hall in the Brookline Library, open to the public, right?
Red carpet.
Okay, right? We have it. It's noted. It's being recorded. She has agreed to do so. Question.
Yeah. I know you've done a lot of work with the refugees here in Brookline. What advice would you give to them? I mean, you were refugees 40 years ago, and now you have to see it firsthand as an adult, and their struggles are different, and we have one group of refugees, now we're going to get another group of refugees, and I mean, it's just these endless at this thing. What advice would you give them?
So great question. Mike was a refugee maybe 40 years ago. Things are different, but at the same time not, right? So like, what do you do? What advice do you give? Like, how are you helping the refugees now that are coming, that she's literally physically helping with? What advice would you give us so that we can be a part of making their transition here more welcoming and
That's a
inclusive?
great question, and it's a complicated question for a few reasons. It's also a two-part question. It's also a two-part question. So the first, how can we help? First, we need to accept others, and I've been trying to work with my son's school to kind of do all these programming around refugees. We did a whole skating event, collecting all these clothes and figuring out what do they need, not throwing things at them, but actually figuring out what do they need to survive here. So we collect gift cards. They have food. They can get WIC and all that, but they can't buy blankets, for example. They don't have cash to go to Target. So we collected a whole Ziploc bag of Target gift cards. That's one. And then they need a way to cook, and they wanted pressure cookers. But everyone's like, oh, we can get the crock pot. No, they don't know how to use the crock pot. They need the most basic. So learning about what they need, and that's the first part. The second part is to really accept them as a community. They are no different from us. They were thrust into this world that they didn't want to be. And if we see a refugee and not shying away from them or placing stereotypes of them, that's what we can do from our end. From a refugee point of view, it is scary being here, not knowing the language, not knowing the culture for Afghans. My dressing might offend them, not covering my head, whatever it is. We just try to respect them and love them, also learn the environment slowly, give them the time and the space, help them. Like if they can't speak, don't correct them, for example. If they're making mistakes, I was corrected all the time for my English. Even to this day, I'm like, hey, you understand what I'm saying. I may not have the word, my verb conjugation might not be correct, but you get what I'm saying. As we just need to, slowly, if they want help in speaking, then you do offer it, but don't make them feel even shy and revert back into their shell. We need to let them open up because they are part of our community and they will have an impact on us. It can be negative or positive, and that's up to us.
So I have a little like PS to add to her answer. Another thing is to ensure that you're registered to vote and that you vote. And when you decide who to vote for, you're voting for folks who you know are looking to be welcoming and helpful to refugees and who are looking to provide the social services and wraparound services that you need as a society. But not just for refugees, I mean, for all individuals who are in need. And I think that's something that we kind of sometimes don't forget. Like, I'm like, okay, I need to bring blankets to mine. But really, I also need to make sure, you know, on the different Tuesdays, I'm out voting, right? Or driving some folks to vote, because it's very easy but often forgotten way that we can make a greater systemic change. So don't forget to vote.
Actually, there's one thing that you guys can help me with. You know, any jobs for refugees, even the Ukrainians who are coming in, we're making a job database just so that they can access it. More like a LinkedIn blue collar for refugees and immigrants.
Okay, so in case you didn't hear that, all the way out there, if you know of any jobs, in particular blue collar jobs, that would be helpful to Afghan, Ukrainian, and other refugees, contact Mai yesterday, because she's putting together a whole database to help them, because they want to work, they want to be helpful, they want to be a part of society, and they want to make their own living, right? Just like we all did at one point when we came here. So if you have the opportunity or you know of someone who does, make that connection with Mai. Yes, of course you can always ask a question. Shoot, lie.
Very specific.
So I'm thinking I can be a generation. But my parents were from China, and then I was there in Japan for 20 years. Then I remember a third of my life in Asia, a third of my life in Europe, and now a third of my life here. And you know, from the introduction, I knew that we really so many places. I came here first when I was 46, rather late in my life, you know, and with my two children. And one thing that has really, you know, is interesting, personally, I don't talk about it much, but is the fact that why is it that for the first almost 50 years of my life, most of my life, I never was really confronted with the notion of racism. I felt that, you know, things were okay in Japan, I used to live among the international community, so we were rather good with each other. In Europe, when I was living in France and working all over Europe, I actually felt as a Chinese that, you know, we were respected. Okay, the culture, the arts, that there was an appreciation of that. And it's really, you know, quite jarring to me, especially at my older age, to realize that, you know, I'm finally experiencing what I think is real racism. And I'm wondering, what do you think? Because you travel, you know, from different countries, from your experience in different countries.
Yeah. Oh, hold on, I'm going to just repeat.
And then, why is it, you know, that over here, all of a sudden, I realize everybody is talking about this label of minority. Everybody, you know, knows what it is to be erased or invisible. These notions that have become so common, and which really affect our younger people, because our younger people are more American literate. You know, and many of the generation of refugees that arrived here, who all they did was work hard for their children. So that's something that I think about a lot personally, because I have children, I have grandchildren, you know, and I think if they're going to be confronted with it, but I don't have an answer, because I'm so surprised that I almost didn't feel it for 50 years. And all of a sudden, in the last, you know, half a dozen years or so, it's a notion that's really, we're bombarded by it.
So Shulan's question, Shulan is actually a previous Brookline Woman of the Year too, just so you know. She gives so much to the town, it's incredible. So she says, you know, I lived part of my life, you know, about 20 years in Japan and another 20 years or so in Europe. And she says, you know, I've been here now for over a dozen years. And how come I didn't experience racism until I'm in the US? You know, that is incredible. And she says, you know, she started her book and she said, you've also traveled. You know, and it seems like when we read your book, like when you're in places and spaces like, you know, Africa and France and different parts of Europe, like you're just in all these other places, it doesn't seem like these issues are the issues that you carry, that you have when you're here in the US. So I guess Shulan and me and the rest of us are being interested, you know, what do you think? Like, why is the racism so real and we feel it here, maybe in the US?
It's a really good question, and it's a really challenging one to dissect. I also, living in, so I grew up in really low income communities for most of my life, and in those communities, I never faced racism. The minute I leave those communities, I said those words or whatever, I'm like, oh, what is this? Why are they reacting this way? Like, for example, leaving Lawrence to go to Bowdoin. That was the first time I felt like I was on the peripheral of campus, that no one wanted me there. They said all these things, and I was like, wow. And when you're in a community that you're accepted, you don't really face those issues as much. And I want to go back to the international bit, but I want to discuss racism in the US. It is so hard. Back then, the racism in the 80s, the first thing we heard was the four-letter G word. They don't say that now, thank God, but it was used all the time. And we were coming from a war-torn country that America just lost its first war in. And then we're in a country that people are like, why are you here? And so they were resentful of us for being in Seattle, for example. I think in the US, and this is all wrong, it may change. What I think now may change as I learn more, as I talk to more people, is that when people are just, they're raised in a certain way, they grow up in their own bubble, and they aren't aware of what's out there, and then they see us, they say things to us, it might be microaggression or racism, but they may or may not have that intention. So that's the first part. And when they do, it's kind of like, oh, maybe we need to approach it in a different way. It's really hard. But one of the things I do to solve racism is I kind of just bombard people with love. And I elevate their taste buds. Because if I can get them through food and through knowledge, they will know a little bit about me and my culture. And then that might kind of erase some of their negative feelings towards me. And I'm doing this with my son's school because I didn't expect my son to experience racism, being half Vietnamese and who looks, more Caucasian than Asian, but he has faced it. And I'm trying to work with the school and say, hey, let's not punish the kid who says ching chong ching to him. Let's tell him why this might hurt, or let's share our food with them so they can understand our culture a little bit more. It's hard to communicate words to people, but you can communicate through food. And that's what Anthony Bourdain did. And that's why I love
breaking bread.
Yeah,
Shulan often does that. She's also very good.
And actually, I'm doing that. So my husband and I got a ton of Ukrainian type candy for this for my son's school, so they can learn about Ukraine, but also learn about the food to elevate their taste buds to really understand the culture. So I think one is ignorance, one not understanding and knowing and thinking what you are used to is normalized and someone else is different. The other is intentions versus what they really are feeling and saying. But it's really complex, and I don't know how to break it up. But I know that at Bowdoin, when I entered, I faced a lot of racism. And then more recently, I wrote an essay for the college And people who used to say things to me or thought I got in because of affirmative action or didn't think I belonged there, that has changed their mind. Now they understand at that point in time, they didn't have the knowledge. So if we can spread the knowledge and not be so sensitive, just understand that people might have need time to learn. If we can give them that opportunity, then I think that can help break that down. But we're far away from that, to be honest. We're nothing near there. I think we can only do it at the individual level and start one group or one person at a time. In terms of international, I know we're all the time. I traveled everywhere, Middle East, Africa, villages, Asia, and I think part of that is that I'm going in to help people. I'm going into villages to help them, find ways to kind of improve their economic, and they think of me as a person coming to really work with them and accepting them for who they are. And I'm there, so it's such a short trip that they don't see. I don't get to feel the intricacies of those cultures and the dynamics of race and all the different divisions in society.
So our time, like I think my real one job is just to keep us on time, and I'm failing. So we're gonna have to end shortly, but a lot of this came out because she wrote and she shared and she's being creative, and it's something that we don't all see many Asian Americans often do, and it was how Lily and the library and Mike connected, and so thankful to the Postnet. So I wanted to let Mai end her piece with that poem that you wrote, so she's still writing.
So I wrote a poem for Windsor, and that was just last week.
She's gonna read it really loudly, almost yelling it at you.
This poem actually summarizes the book in a lot of ways, and a lot of the topics that we discussed, including racism and isolation. So my journey started on the banks of a river, so beautiful, only water from you can deliver. Lush jungle, blue skies, and sounds of water so serene, creating a view of life like a perfect movie scene. Everything looks better from a distance, like an Instagram post that masks a non-existence. Born on the banks of a muddy river, a facade of life that drastically differs. Up close to many, my life was non-existent. In the country destroyed by war and resistance. In the land across the globe so far and foreign, with names hard to pronounce, unlike Lauren and Warren. In darkness and hunger, seeking freedom and hope. Attacked in a boat with no way out and no way to cope. Violation of all kinds by pirates wearing bandoliers. Screaming in fear, begging to keep at least my ears. Nothing matters in these moments of despair, except their ability to gasp an ounce of air. Attacks of all kinds can destroy my facade, but nothing can take away my internal lightning rod. A rod that has always guided me through a new day, overcoming any darkness to feel a kiss of sun ray. Courage and strength have kept me standing up, even when I've been rejected and endured many breakups. Wherever I am, I can remind myself of my core identity to guide me through life's ups and downs towards serenity. I am who I am, simply as I am, a girl from the banks of the river, ready to hit that grand slam. Nothing to lose, no idea of a win, journeying through life down the river like Huckleberry Finn, adventures to fill and memories to build, move over the fear to avoid being unfulfilled. Condescension, racism, and hate. We'll have to step aside and wait. Like life has room for people like me and you, there's no cue for us to shine through and through. Like Madeleine Albright, whom I adore, I found my voice and silence no more. Learning to read and write was my goal, though late at the age of 12 years old. One challenge after another, I found myself alone, isolated from groups and people as I hold my own, discovering myself and on many adventures in Paris, learning to love myself and all that I cherish. Move over the racism, condescension, and hate. It this too much to bear, all this weight? I am who I am, exactly as I am, a woman of any color who aims to get my grand slam. Thank you so much, everybody.
So, thank you. It's been a total honor to read your words, to see myself in them, and to know so much more about you. And I want to double date because I have a lot of questions for you. But also, I also have just a couple of announcements. First, the Brookline Booksmith is here, so you can get your book signed by her. Maybe Father's Day gifts, graduation, anytime she'll sign them. And the Booksmith is here. And the Brookline Booksmith is an incredible local, favorite in our town. So please do support them, whether it's for this book or many others. And then also to let you know, this is AEPI month. And on Wednesday, we have the great honor, Shulan is happy to talk to us. She has organized something that is not quite the same, but I think will also be just as inspiring in so many ways, is the Brookline Asian American Family Network and the town of Brookline is going to be celebrating AEPI month on Wednesday night, also going to be broadcast by Brookline Interactive Group. Thank you. Where we'll hear from student essay winners at our Brookline High Schools who wrote about what does it mean to be Asian American. To hear the words of our students living now and what their experience is like, and how they're writing, which is incredible. I had the honor of reading them. They all blew me away. And the Booksmith is also a great partner in that, as well as many other great sponsors. So please come on Wednesday night. It's just online, so we'll see you there at 6 o'clock. And then also our library is doing a lot for API month, and please come and view. They have flyers out here, a short story and a film as well on Tuesday, May 17th. And then if you are so inspired by Mai and are looking to write, do it. Right? We need your voice. And Brookline also has a flash fiction writing workshop, also free and available. It's in the library or on Zoom. And then throughout our Brookline library, and I think also in Town Hall, we'll have a number of artifacts and items from Asian American families throughout Brookline to share more about our heritage. So there's a lot going on. So I'll see you again on Wednesday night online on Zoom with Big for the Asian American Pacific Islander towns, of Brookline celebration. And then I'll also see you, I guess, after the conclusion outside Brookline. We'll sign pictures, and I think she'll take lots of sign books, and she'll take lots of pictures with you too, because I think pictures are fun. So thank you so much for coming. Many thanks to Lily and our Brookline Library staff for putting this on, and also to Ann Tyson, Brookline Interactive Group out there. You are an incredible community partner.